welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us here for our Thanksgiving worship service at the First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City. With the Thanksgiving service, I guess we've got to admit that the holidays are indeed upon us. Thanksgiving kicks it off, and I'm really happy to share with you that we will have all of our holiday services for you this year. Don't let COVID and our not being together interrupt anything, because we're going to follow through on solstice. We're going to have lessons and carols. We're going to have a Christmas Eve service live, in fact, on Zoom. All that information is still forthcoming. So we're all very, very excited about sharing the Christmas holiday, the mood, the spirit with all of you. I only have one announcement, and that it relates to the holidays, and that is a wonderful opportunity led by the Reverend Monica Dobbins, who's going to be doing daily reflections. And it's going to be an opportunity to just get a little deeper into the spirit and meaning of the Advent season. The group will be following the book called All Creation Waits. And for more information on this, you can take a look at the last torch, or there's still one more torch coming out. That is our newsletter. Or get in direct contact with Monica herself to find out how you can be a part of this extraordinary experience. Of course, when I first heard the title of the book, All Creation Waits, I thought it was a reference to all creation waiting for Donald Trump to concede. But Monica assures me that it really has a more nature theme to it, and that the congregation will really, really enjoy it. And I know that to be true. So let us take our chalice that we have at home, or a candle, or whatever, so we can light a flame that really brings us all together. Symbol of light and of knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Every family has their own special traditions. It could be pancakes on Saturday mornings, or going to the same camping spot each summer. When it comes to holidays, families tend to double down on their traditions. In my own family as a child, the Christmas tree always went up the day after Thanksgiving. The 4th of July was spent in Park City, and on Easter, you ate ham. Holidays are markers set in our year, points we look to throughout the year to mark the passage of time, but also to draw us toward concrete, physical things families keep the same, grounding them in their familial uniqueness. For a lot of people, the traditions we hold dear will be different this year. I know for my own family, we're not seeing our extended loved ones in person this Thanksgiving. Instead of adding extra seats to my dining room table, we'll be adding a laptop with a Zoom room open for people to drop into. Our traditions are being altered this year. As we gather around our Zoom calls, though, I would imagine several of us, as we reflect on this year, can still reach for gratitude, for thanks. The Reverend Laura Horton Ludwig offers these words, which, for this year, I think are even more applicable. For what shall we give thanks? The wheel of the year has turned again. Once more, Thanksgiving season has arrived. How shall we sing our song of gratitude now? For what shall we give thanks? For this moment, for friends near and far, for our breath, for love, for courage and clarity, for strength, for delight, for laughter, for beauty, for the tables round which we gather, for the food we enjoy, seasoned with love and memory, for the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky, for the trees who have seen so much and still stand proud, stretching themselves to the sky, for the bright voices of children, for the wisdom of elders, for actions that bless the world, for hard work that makes a difference, for music and art and celebration, for generosity, for compassion, for endurance, for joy, for hope. For all these things, we give thanks. May it be so.
2020 has been a year. How many of you are counting the days until the end of this year? If you're anything like me, you might be glad to see it in the rear view in a little over a month, even if not much substantially changes. It will be enough to see the odometer roll over into a new year and new possibilities. It's got to be downhill from here, right? And yet, as we celebrate Thanksgiving this week, there is gratitude right here in this moment. There's reason to be grateful right here and now. The sky above us is broad and blue. Even when it is cast over with gray, it brings life-giving rain that waters the earth and drenches the thirsty soul. In this season, we are grateful just to breathe, just to feel the cool air of life in our bodies, to feel our lungs exchanging life with life. We are grateful just to go out into the sunshine or to let snowflakes fall on our faces or our tongues. And in our best moments, we can close our eyes and remember that there are many who love us, even if we can't see them, even if we haven't seen them in a long time. We know that gratitude practices are a key to a life of joy and resilience. And in any situation, we can find a cause for gratitude, no matter how mean or dark the moment. We also know that joy and suffering travel side by side. Neither one is far away at any time. And we know, too, that every expression of gratitude carries inside it a call to action on behalf of someone who cannot give thanks in that way. As we say thanks for our breath, we recall those who cannot breathe. As we say thanks for our meal, we recall those who are hungry. As we say thanks for the home that protects us, we recall those who have no place to lay their heads. As we say thanks this year for our very lives, we remember those who have died. And then we give thanks for the lives they lived and for the way the world was changed for the way they lived. This year, it may be a simple, quiet meal rather than a raucous feast. But there's gratitude in that too, if we leave a seat for it. Let our prayers of gratitude ring just as loud at this table as they would in any year, at any table. And as we pray, let our hearts be moved with inspiration for how we may help our neighbors in this season. Amen.
Well, we can all be sure about one thing. We're always going to remember this Thanksgiving. The COVID-19 pandemic has intruded upon our lives to the extent that we are forced to reinvent Thanksgiving as a small, intimate holiday. The demand is great this year for small turkeys, or even a substitute for turkeys, as we are left to improvise on a long-time tradition. What an oxymoron, isn't it, to improvise on tradition? Well, there you have it. There will be no going over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house this year. Instead, we're going to shelter in place. Hard to imagine, but on the most social day of the entire year, we find ourselves in lockdown, wearing masks, and social distancing at 6 feet, 10 feet, or just wave to each other. That's all we can really hope for. Our kids must resort to distance learning, and why not? The whole society is at a distance to protect the common good. Well, not everybody feels this way about protecting the common good. These new constraints, which were unfortunately politicized as either protecting the public or undermining personal freedom, these constraints have proven impotent in the face of widespread non-cooperation. So instead of flattening the curve, as was our general intent, we're experiencing an increased severity of the virus as we now approach the Thanksgiving holiday. For the first time, I believe, in all of history, Republican governors wish they were actually living in a blue state. I mean, say what you want about those horrible, no-good Marxists, but apparently they actually do listen to epidemiologists and they follow the rules. Now, the irony is not lost, especially among Marxists and even democratic socialists, that Thanksgiving is a holiday meant to remind us that a full larder comes attached with a moral obligation towards our neighbor. Gratitude is simply an empty emotion until it sparks a commitment to reciprocity. If this problematic world is going to progress at all, it comes down to, well, basically, what can we do for others? Generosity also gives cause for celebration. But as much as we'd like to celebrate, this year's Thanksgiving will be somewhat muted as health experts try to dissuade family members who are not part of the household to stay away. Well, in my household, plane reservations and motel reservations were canceled, leaving all the festivities to just Mary and me. You know, if only we had insisted last March on having all 5 granddaughters come live with us permanently, well, it would at least have felt a lot more like Thanksgiving this week. What is Thanksgiving supposed to feel like? What does it feel like for you? Can you describe it? For me, the feeling is wrapped up in memories, as I am sure it is also true for you. You know, whenever I recall the mood of Thanksgiving from long ago, it's always part joy and part chaos. Surely, this is not unique to me. It's in the nature of Thanksgiving as we all experience it. I remember that no one ever got invited to Thanksgiving. They just showed up to our house in Queens, as they always had. My cousin and her Southern Baptist husband and their 3 children drove up from Maryland. My brother and his Catholic wife and their 3 children drove down from upstate New York. Another cousin and her African-American husband from Brooklyn showed up until the time when they left our country to have children that they hoped that they could raise without concern, even that many years ago. And of course, there was an interesting band of relatives that also occupy space in the house, but Aunt Trudy, my mother's Aunt Trudy, and Uncle Walter were essential to the whole Thanksgiving festival, or festivity. Actually, it felt like a festival. You see, Aunt Trudy had this unusual trait of sneezing when she was absolutely full. I mean, this is something you could count on. She could not help herself from sneezing. It was like her body saying, well, not a morsel more, or you're just going to explode. And since we're mandated on Thanksgiving to eat as much as we possibly can, we held off dessert until Aunt Trudy sneezed, signaling that she had truly eaten all she could, and then it was time for the pies to come out. It was a good thing that so many folks descended upon our household, because my mother really fancied herself more as an artist than a chef. She was responsible for the Thanksgiving centerpiece, which consistently featured a pilgrim adorned with a funny hat and a large belt buckle. Each year, the dads took all the kids to Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade as the women cooked, and my mother made her pilgrim. And my Catholic brother always offered the prayer, carefully, with universal application, and then the long table extending through 3 rooms of the house burst into raucous conversation and bouts of laughter, subsiding only upon waiting for Aunt Trudy to sneeze. At that blessed sound, the dinner dishes were then removed, and a fine assortment of pies were delivered to the table. Oh, you know, those feel like innocent days from long ago. We believed wholeheartedly in the stories of the first Thanksgiving, these stories that are still mostly taught to our children today. But the innocence has been torn off as we become increasingly familiar with the stories that unveil, well, a certain brutality that in our hearts we'd like to disbelieve. But the fairy tale setting of the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag Indians feasting in a multicultural setting where they shared their food and played games and sowed harmony presents an image that intentionally derails us from processing the cruel nature of these settlers. The stories of white people's entitlement and exceptionalism under the banner of God offer a clear line from 1621 to our present time, permeated with white supremacy and greed. Thanksgiving may come wrapped in personal and tender stories, and if the passage of time tilts these stories a bit towards the apocryphal, well, that's okay. It just makes them more fun. But stories rooted in history don't have the luxury to deviate. They must adhere to the painful truth if we're to have any chance at all of understanding ourselves more fully as products of our history. The intent of that first dinner, 1621, that dinner between the Wampanoag Indians and the Pilgrims, was not centered on food and celebration. It was strictly business. The Wampanoag leader, Osamoquin, showed up with an army of 90 men, more than the entire population of Plymouth. They came prepared to honor a mutual defense pact negotiated the previous spring. Osamoquin heard repeated gunfire and assumed that the Pilgrims were under attack. So he mustered up an army to come to the aid of these new settlers. As it happened, well, quite spontaneously, they spent the next 3 days together eating, drinking, and playing games. The Indians, though, got to remember, they came to save the Pilgrims. But there was no reciprocity in trust and goodwill. The colonists wanted to expand their territory. And once they felt, well, somewhat established, they attacked the Wampanoag tribe and gained some pretty bloody victories. And to celebrate their victories, the Plymouth men mounted the head of Osamoquin's son above the town on a pike, where it remained for 20 years until it completely decomposed. The story of Thanksgiving is essentially an invention that was aimed to deflect attention away from the radical violence throughout our nation against Native populations, African Americans, Latinx, and Asian populations. By 1670, the settlers reached a population of about 70,000 in southern New England alone, twice that of the native people. They pressed hard to acquire Indian land through so-called sales driven by debt, threat, and violence. The settlers charged the natives under British law and sentenced them to, well, simply unpayable fines, imprisonment, and even executions. They considered Indians their inferiors. It all boiled down to a typical colonial war marked by the seizure and sale of Indian people as slaves. And in the centuries that followed, New England Indians also suffered indentured servitude, which often resulted in the enslavement of the debtors' children. Now, this is quite a different story from the pious settlers from civilized England. But the story was invented so that America could celebrate its founding, taking place in New England by people who were white, Protestant, Democratic, and blessed with an American character centered on family, work, individualism, freedom, and faith. Essentially, it exemplified the America some want to make great again. Pure myth, but a myth that sustained American expansion justified by white supremacy, justified also by God. Now, Thanksgiving is really a loaded holiday filled with, well, yeah, personal sentiment, especially if you're white, but also it's a time to confront the real stories of how we have oppressed people of color from the very beginning. We need to understand that the American character didn't change on Election Day 2016. Our nature is inherent in our history from the very start, the start of white Europeans landing upon these shores with an agenda. Now, it's understanding this agenda with which I want to close this service. Probably the greatest historian on interpreting 17th century America, Perry Miller, wrote his seminal book called Errand into the Wilderness. Errand, running an errand. Errand, as in a duty, chore, task. The Pilgrims had an errand into the wilderness, into the pristine forests of New England and beyond. They came with a purpose, but Perry Miller kind of says, I'll be damned if I know what that purpose, what that errand really was. Did the Pilgrims come to America as though on an errand from a higher power? Or were they on an errand seeking to improve their own status? Was their aim to seek a place to worship their God freely, but then they were set upon by new and greater personal opportunities? Who knows for sure? But I think it's utterly important for us to understand that we in America today, 2020, we also have an errand into the wilderness. We need to understand that this is a moral wilderness that we face today, with countless possibilities to either follow a path that leads to the common good or leads to our own individual enrichment. Perry Miller asked, what happened to the European mind when it became something other? Good question. Don't we need to ask the same type of question today? What happened to our humanity which has become something other? Greed now, ostensibly endorsed by God, has made us unrecognizable, even to ourselves. In a nation so divided, we could say in a nation so confused, our errand into this wilderness is to tear down structural racism and build up the care and nurture of all of our people. Thanksgiving. Well, yes, a good time to count our blessings. It's also a good time to determine our mission, our task, determine our errand into the wilderness that will bring justice to everyone. We may need to endure a smaller Thanksgiving celebration that we would want, but it's an important Thanksgiving for us to ponder how we best continue as pilgrims. We are the pilgrims today, facing a daunting wilderness. As we extinguish the chalice, let us entertain the insightful recommendation of Lord Bertrand Russell, of all people, on how to wrap our heads around the meaning of Thanksgiving. Now, he says it's a healthy thing now and then to put a question mark on the things you have. He takes it no further than that. He doesn't need to. So at some point this Thanksgiving, despite the COVID and all the challenges wrought by a difficult 2020, a year that we yearn to bury soon in the past, give a thought to your family and friends, the fine food, your favorite easy chair, your warm furnace, democracy, your dogs and cats, and all who make you feel loved. Then place a question mark, and you will understand immediately the piercing reality of gratitude. Happy Thanksgiving. Amen.